All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Shurim and Drashos this month in honor of their grandchildren. May they grow to become the best version of themselves. Shir this morning is dedicated to refuah shalima for Yehuda Ben Michal. Our week of learning sponsors, Jeff and Karen Cohn, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Karen's mother, Clara Oxman. A day of learning sponsors, Jerry and Briana Rubin, in celebration of the marriage of Chaya, Yehudis Neuberger, and Nachum Twersky. May they be zocha to build a bayit neeman b'Yisrael. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah. All of those who need a refuah will have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And every chassan and kala, and even those who aren't a chassan and kala, should be zocha to build a bayit neeman b'Yisrael. All right, those with that, let us begin. A lot to do today with a really beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Aleph 41. We are picking up on Mem Amud Beis, and we just really got into the Mishnah. So let's begin. Actually, at the Gemara. So let's just begin again at the Gemara. So Amar Yehuda Amar Rav Zudi Rabbi Meir. So let's remember again, the Mishnah outlined an interesting model, right? And the model of the Mishnah was that essentially there is a switch off. When a girl is entitled, when the father is able to sell his daughter, she's not entitled to knas. Conversely, when she's entitled to knas, ultimately, again, the father is not able to go ahead and sell her. So the Gemara says, Rav, Zudiv Rabbi Meir. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Avacham the Chum say, Yesh la knas b'makom mecher. The knas says, no, the two concepts overlap. The concepts of knas and mecher, in fact, do overlap. The Sanya, I will say, where did we learn this from? The Sanya, we're seeing in Raisa, Kitana bibas yom echad, ve'ad shetavi shtei sa'aros yesh la mecher ve'in la knas. A young girl, from the age of yom echad, from one day, until she brings signs of physical maturation. So we'll say we are assuming right now that what this means is from the time that she's 1 day old up until the time she becomes a nara. We assume that signs of physical maturation, right, represent naros. So ultimately, from that period of time, she is entitled to, father is able to sell her, but ultimately she is not entitled to knas. From the age of na'aros until bagros, 6 months, 12 years old to 12 years old and 6 months, yesh la knas ve'in la mecher. Ultimately, the father can no longer sell her. So again, the father's right to sell his daughter ends at na'aros, and knas only applies for that short window of na'aros, from na'aros to bagros. Divrei Rabbi Meir. So we'll say these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Good. Rabbi Meir over because Rabbi Meir said, "Chomakom sheish mecher in knas, v'chomakom sheyesh knas in mecher." Because Rabbi Meir said, as long the two concepts do not overlap. If the father could sell his daughter, there's no knas. If there is a knas, he can't sell his daughter. So we'll say, so once again, this is Rabbi Meir's model, which I want to point out is the model that we began this parak with. This is what we began the parak with. The right to sell one's daughter begins from the age of 1 day old until she becomes a na'ara. Once she becomes a na'ara, father can no longer sell his daughter. The halacha of knas applies only during the very limited window of na'aros, 12 years old to 12 years old and 6 months, up until bagros. The Chum have a different approach. Chum say, Ketana mibas gimel shana v'yom echad va'ad sheti bager yesh lo knas. The Chum say, from the age of 3 years old and 1 day up until bagros, through bagros, she has knas. She has knas. Knas in mecher lo, she has knas but not mecher. Ema af knas. Rather, it must mean she has knas even with mecher. So I will say, the position of the Chachamim is essentially the two concepts run concurrently. From the age of 3 years old in 1 day through 12 years old in 6 months, up until bagrus, a father is able to sell his daughter. That's number one. And during that same time, she is entitled to knas. This is fundamental machlokes. Amar Rav Chisda, my time with Rabbi Meir. So what is Rabbi Meir's logic? What's Rabbi Meir's logic? So Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, "Velo sihya liisha." Ultimately, the pasuk says that halacha l'maisa, in the case of the ma'anis, in the case of onis, in the case of when he violates her, the Torah says she shall be to him as a wife. So Rabbi Meir understands B'mahava atzma kasov medaber. Torah is talking about a girl who is capable of entering into marriage. What is the age at which a girl is able to consensually enter into marriage? Naros. Naros. And this pasuk, of course, is talking about the knas. So you see from here that according to Rabbi Meir says that halacha l'maisa, knas only applies at a time where she could technically enter into marriage, which means from Na'aros and on. For Rabbanon, Reish Lakish, the Rabbanon will say the name of Reish Lakish, Amar the pasuk says, Nara, afilu kitana b'mashma. This is so fascinating. They darshan both say that when the pasuk says Nara, by knas, Nara even means kitana. I will say that is such a strange rasha, or at least it seems like a strange rasha, because usually Nara means Nara, right? And Nara is a defined halachic status between 12 years old and 12 years old and 6 months. And yet here we're saying that Nara means kitana. So we'll say, what does that mean? So let's analyze this. Shomra pabarei d'Rav Chanan, mibei kluchis, azul amra kamei d'Rav Simi bar Ashi. Amra, he said to him, Ason mehamas nisala. You learn it from there. Anon meha masninala. We learn it from here. Amreish Lakish, Hamosi Shemra ala Kitana. So I will say, essentially, the drasha of the Chachamim, of the Rabbanon, is that they understand that the word Nara, see, up until this entire time, we've been focused on the fact that Nara, we always assume that Nara means Nara. It means to go from 12 years old to 12 years old in 6 months. The Chachamim coming along and say, no. Nara means kitana. In other words, it doesn't not mean nara, but it also means kitana. Nara is an expansive word that essentially covers a girl from 3 years old in one day, through what? Through 12 years old and 6 months, or I should say, up until 12 years old and 6 months. So where do we learn this from? Amreish Lakish, a different source as well. Hamotzi shemra ala kitana pater. It's interesting, I will say, if a man marries a kitana, and he's Motzi Shemra. What does it mean to be Motzi Shemra? Motzi Shemra is the process where a man marries a woman, and then what occurs? He claims that she was not a Basula. She was not a Basula. Okay, so if a man is Motzi Shemra on a Kitana, Pater. Ultimately, again, he's Pater. Rashi says, Pater, Deva Onsha Osamea Kesev, Venasnu La'aviha Na'ara Maliksiv. Now, listen to this. So man marries a Kitana, which again could technically happen. Let's say the father marries the girl off. So the father marries his minor daughter off. Husband claims she wasn't the Basula. It turns out husband's lying. However, we are saying that husband's lying. So I'll say generally, there's a penalty payment you have to pay. So the Gemara says over here, Shlakish says, in this case, because she's a Kitana, he's Pater. What's the pshat? Shene'emar, v'nasnu la'aviha na'ara, Na'ara male dibra kosov. I will say this is fascinating. So the Gemara says like this: the word Na'ara is written different ways in the Torah. Sometimes Na'ara is written male, nun, ayin, resh, hey, and sometimes Na'ara is written chaser, deficient, nun, resh, ayin. Rish Lakish suggests the following: when Na'ara is written male, nun, resh, ayin, hey, halacha l'maisa, that comes to tell us that it is only referring to, that's an exclusionary phrase. And what does it exclude? It excludes anyone other than a halachic nara. So when it's written malay, it dafka explicitly only refers to a nara. When it's written chaser, deficient, it includes who? Everyone. Nara, in other words, I will say a little differently. Sometimes nara means halachic nara, and sometimes nara just means girl. How do you know which is which? Reish Lakish posits nara written malek in the complete form means dafka, only a nara. Nara written in a chaser form includes all girls. I mean, when I say all girls, of course, everyone agrees that where does it end? At bagros, right? At bagros. So I'll point out something interesting. So for example, in Motzi Shemra, Nara is written Malay, yet in Knas, in the case of Ones, it's written Chaser. So therefore, again, this is now the position of the Rabbanon, that they say Nara even means Kitana. So says the Gemara, let's analyze this. So the Gemara says, Maskif l'Ravadar Ava, time of the Kasev Rachmana Nara, Halav haki aminu afilu na afilu kitana. Now what's interesting is, so according to this, the only reason why we say that a man is pater for being Mosi Shemra on his wife who's a kitana is because Na'ara is written in the full form. Had it not been written in the full form, Male, I would have assumed that he's chayiv even for being Mosi Shemra on a kitana. V'haksiv, but the pasuk says, Vim emes haya hadavar hazeh lo nimtzu b'sulo na'ara v'otziu es hana'ara pesach beis avia uskaluha. Yet Rabbosai, we learn, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says that if it wasn't indeed true, and the girl wasn't a besula, and therefore we understand because she wasn't a besula, she must have had relations after Erusin, that we would execute her. But if we're talking about a kitana, ukitana lav bas onshinhi, a kitana is not subject to punishment. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Elakan nara hakomakum shene'emar nara afilu kitana mashma. So again, Rabbi, you have to understand over here that halacha l'maisa, this is a reference, of course, to an actual nara, but it comes to teach us something else, that whenever the Torah goes ahead and writes the deficient form of nara, that comes to include even a katana. So therefore, Rabbi will say, this is the fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. And at least for our specific circumstances over here, it comes into how you understand the word nara. Rabbi Meir is clearly of the opinion that nara means nara. And therefore, the halachos of ones and mifata only apply to a nara. Only apply to a nara. That's it. Right? On the other hand, the Chachamim or the Rabbanan hold that no, nara means different things in different places. When nara is written malay, nun ayin resh hey, that's where it's malay, then ultimately only refers to a nara. If it's spelled deficiently, as it is in the case of ones and mefata, it could apply to any girl below the age of Bagrus. That's the fundamental machlokes. Good. Well, it says the Mishnah, top of Mem Aleph. Very interesting sugya. Ha'omer pasisi es bito shel ploni. But listen to this case. Reuven comes along, and Reuven comes to Beis Din, and he says, I admit that I seduced the daughter of Shimon. So just to be clear over here, no one is initiating a claim against Reuven. Right? Not Shimon, not Shimon's daughter Rachel. No one has initiated the claim. Apparently, again, Reuven has a guilty conscience, so he shows up to Beis Din and he says, I did it. I seduced this girl. So now this is a fascinating case. What does the Mishnah say? Mishalim boshes hu begam al piatzmo. So remember again, going back to what we've learned, what are the buckets of payment for seduction? Right? So there's boshes, pegam, there's no tsar, right? And knas, and the penalty payment. So the Mishnah says like this: based on his own admission, Reuven will pay boshes and pegam, ve'in mishalim knas, but he does not pay knas. He does not pay the knas. And I will say, why doesn't he pay the knas? Take a look at Rashi. Ve'in mishalim knas. This is really interesting. Rashi says, "Babava kama nafkulon mode biknas potter me'ashar yarshiun elokim prat lamar she'asas." I will say, there is a concept in halacha of mode biknas potter. If you proactively admit that you are liable to a knas payment, in a fascinating twist of events, you are potter. This is based on a drush and Baba Kama, that the only time that you are chayiv for a knas is when you are found guilty by a court to be liable to knas. If you admit the knas of your own volition, you are potter. It's just based on the Gzeras HaKosov. So this is fascinating. So now Reuven rolls into Beis Din. He says, listen, I seduced Rachel, Shimon's daughter. Beis Din says, okay, you're going to be chayiv to Boshes and Pegam, but potter from Knas. So also remember again, this goes back to yesterday's daf, or truth is already Sunday's daf, where again, really Friday's daf, possibly Thursday's daf, right? We'll say, where again, we essentially see that there are different forms of payment. In halacha, there's mamon and there's knas. So we're going to see in just a moment. Knas is a penalty payment. Mamon is compensatory damages. Compensatory damages, you could be liable through your own admission. Knas, you are exempted through your own admission. How we know the difference, we'll see in just a moment. Similarly, the Gemara says, Homer ganafti. We'll say same thing. Let's go through some other examples. Reuben comes into Beis Din. I stole Shimon's watch. Or better yet, I stole Shimon's sheep. You pay back the principal, but you don't pay back kefal, right? Kefal is the double payment, right? Similarly again, or tashlumi arba v'chamisha, or you will not pay the 4 and 5 times. We'll remember again, 4 and 5 time penalty payment represent the theft and slaughter of a sheep or an ox. You won't pay these items because these are penalty payments, right? Hemis shori es ploni. Oh, shoro shel ploni. But let's say Reuven comes into Beis and Reuven admits, my shar killed Shimon, or my shar killed the shar of Shimon. So Reuven ultimately again will pay compensatory damages based on his own admission. Hemis shori avdo shel ploni. If Reuven comes in and he says, my shar killed the eved of Shimon. So let's remember again, what's the halacha if your shar kills someone's eved? We just saw this in yesterday's daf. What's the halacha? 30 silver pieces, 30 shkalim. So what's the halacha? Ein mishalim al pi atzmo. You don't pay of your own admission. So I will say, here's the principle. The principle is you are obligated to pay compensatory damages through your own admission, but you are exempt if you admit to a knas. You are exempt from that knas. You can never pay a knas based on your own admission. Of course, now both side the question becomes: how do you know what's knas and what's mamon? What's knas and what's mamon? What's a penalty versus compensatory damages? It's very simple. Ze'aklal kala mishalim yeser ama shehezik eino mishalim al pi atzmo. We will say here is the simple distinction: compensatory damages vary based on the situation. That's it. Compensatory damages actually take into an account an analysis of what occurred. Versus knas, how was knas established? It's just a fixed amount. It's a fixed amount. Totally divorced of the reality of the people involved. So I will say, so again, remember, we appreciate this. My shar kills an eved. What's the halacha for shar killing an eved? 30 shkalim. Doesn't make a difference what kind of eved he was. A man violates a woman, 50 silver shkalim, right? A man seduces a woman, 50 silver shkalim. So again, those are knasos. Anything that is a fixed amount and whose amount does not vary upon the circumstances of the individuals involved is a knas. Anything that is analyzed, right, and that varies is compensatory damages. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Velisne anasti." So I will say, the Gemara says, 1 second, you're missing like a major case. What about the case of a man who violates a woman? In other words, this is our whole parak. So what you bring in the case of seduction, but you leave out the case of violation. So why not bring in that case? Velisne anasti. Lomi by Kamar. The Gemara says, no, you don't even have to include that case. I'll tell you why. Lomi by anasti delo pagim lo dimishali boshe supagam piatzmo. So it goes without saying, in a case of where Reuven comes into Beis Din, and he says, I admit that I violated Rachel. Of course, he's going to have to pay. He's going to have to pay boshes and pigam and probably tsar as well. That goes without saying why I both say, because in that case, when Reuven of his own volition admits that he violated Rachel, that admission comes at no, what's the right word? It doesn't come with any type of negativity on Rachel, right? As opposed to aval pasisi dikapagim la ema lo mishalim al piatzmo. See, Abba said, listen to this. When Reuven comes into Beis Din and he says, I seduced Rachel, he'll say, not only is he admitting that he's done something, what else does his claim involve? That Rachel consensually engaged in something. So I will say, the Havamina is, I would think that Beis Din would not accept a claim like that. Why? Because accepting a claim like that, Rabbi said, by definition, casts aspersions on Rachel. Right? In other words, it's not just Reuven. See, in the case where Reuven comes into Beis Din and he says, I violated Rachel, that statement does not cast aspersions on Rachel. Rachel is a victim. So I understand why I could believe Reuven, and therefore he's going to have to pay Boshes and Pegam based on his statement. But for him to come into Beis Din and say, I seduced Rachel, I would have thought that halacha l'maisa, perhaps we would not believe him. To which the Gemara says, "So aval pasisi tekapagim la imolo mishalim apiasol kamashlo." So therefore, the Mishnah teaches us the novel ruling that even though his admission that Rachel was seduced casts certain aspersions on Rachel, we still accept his testimony. Now, both say what I will point out is something very interesting in halacha. we have the concept that sometimes we could accept a person's statement legabe themselves, but not legabe someone else. In other words, I will say what I would point out is as follows. If Reuven shows up to Beis Din and Reuven says, I seduced Rachel, we say, okay, pay Rachel, Boshes and Pigam. They both say, does that tell us that Rachel is not a Basula? Does Rachel is not a Basula? No. Why? Because Reuven is not believed. Reuven is believed to say that he's chayiv. In general, I'm believed to say I'm chayiv something. So if I walk into Beis Din and I say, listen, amnesty, I did something wrong. It's almost elul. I want to make things right. I did something wrong to this woman. I want to do good by her. Okay, Beis Din says, fine. Okay, go ahead. You're not going to pay the knas, but go ahead and pay damages. But I will say, but that admission, right? Reuven clearing his guilt does not go ahead and now reclassify Rachel's status. That Reuven is not believed to do. So, for example, if Rachel now is read a shidduch to the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol has to marry a basula. So ultimately, we have no reason to believe that she's not a basula. So this is very important. But nevertheless, the Hamamina is, I would have thought that I can't accept Reuven's testimony at all regarding seduction. Kamashlan I can. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah does not reflect the view of the following Tana. How so? Tisayin Rabbi Shimon, Yehuda Omer Shum Rabbi Shimon, Af Boshes upegam eno mishalim al piatzmo, lo kol heimeno sheyifkom bito shel ploni. So we'll say, listen to this. So there is another school of thought. The other school of thought says, no. When Reuven rolls into Beis Din and says, I violated this girl, we don't listen to him. Why don't we listen to him? Because we're not going to believe him to go ahead and cast doubt upon the basula status of Rachel. So the Gemara says, Amle Papa la Abaye, Nechala ledida mai. So Papa said to Abaye, so this is the sheet of Abaye. Right? So Abaye comes along and says that halacha lamaisa, I should say Rabbi Shimon comes along and says that halacha lamaisa, when Reuven comes into Beis Din and says, I seduced Rachel, we do not believe him, even to cause him to pay Boshes and Pegam, because that statement by definition casts the pall of aspersion upon Rachel. So they said, so listen to this. Rabbi said to Abaye, what happens if Rachel says, it's okay, I don't care. In other words, Rachel says, fine, cast doubt upon my Besula status, because hey, money is money. Right? So let's say she says, I'm happy to get the Boshes and Pegam. So what's the halacha? So my dilma lo nechale lavia. Okay, even if she's okay with it, her father might not be okay with it. I nechale lavia mai. What happens if her father's okay with it? Right? The father says, okay, payday. Right? What's the halacha? Maybe there are family members of both who are not okay with this. What happens if the family members are okay with it? So the Gemara says, there's got to be some family member, some faraway place who's not okay with this. So just point out, this is a machlokes. So as much as the Mishnah indicates that when Reuven shows up in Beis Din and says, I violated Rachel, we accept that statement to cause him to pay Boshes and Pegam. There's another school of thought that says we don't accept that, because along with that statement comes essentially a de facto reality that Rachel was complicit in an act of relations, that she had a consensual act of illicit relations. Again, not arayos, but illicit relations. And he's not believed to impugn her reputation. Thank you. To impugn her reputation in that way. Now, both say the truth is, there's a very good hybrid model, right? As I just mentioned before, the hybrid model is he's believed legabe himself, but he's not believed legabe Rachel. So you have this interesting hybrid model where if a Reuven comes into Beis Din and says, I did X, I seduced this girl, Beis Din says, okay, pay her Boshes and Pegam, but Lamaisi, you're not believed to impugn her reputation. Good, says the Gemara. So supposed to listen to this. Man says, I stole money, right? I stole money. So he's believed to go ahead and make himself chayiv for the principal, but not for any additional penalty payments. So also remember again, so when it comes to penalty payments would be like kefel, double payment, or arba vechamisha, 4 and 5 time payments in the case of where you steal and slaughter. Good. So supposed to listen to this. Itmar, palganiska. Wow. Here we go. What about chatzi nezek? Chatzi nezek. So we'll say, so again, a little bit of a crash course in chatzi nezek. Chatzi nezek are half damages. When do you have half damages? A very simple case. I have a shar. I have an ox. My ox is what we call a tam. Tam means docile. It's never hurt a person, never hurt another animal. Okay, now what happens? My shar goes ahead and gores Shimon, gores Ruvain. Right? My shar gores Ruvain. So what's the halacha will say? There's a concept of chatzi nezek, of half damages. First time offender, first time gore pays chatzi nezek, half damages. Here we go, Abosai. So palganiska. So here's going to be the shayla. Shabosai is half damages. Is that knas or mamon? Right? Is that a penalty payment or is that compensatory damages? Abosai. Now, why does that matter to us? Why does it matter if it's knas or mamon? Right? So now we see, because let's say I come to Beis Din and I say, my ox gored Ruvain. Right? So now we'll say, if it's knas, I can't become liable based on my own admission. If it's mamon, I can. So that's the shaila. Is chatzi nezek mamon or knas? It's so fascinating. So Rav Papa says, palganiska mamona. Rav Papa says, it's mamon. Rav Yeshua Amar, palganiska kinasa. It's knas. It's a penalty payment. So let's analyze. Here we go. Rav Papa Amar palganiska mamona. Rav Papa says, chatzi nezek is mamon. Why? Why listen to this? Kasavar, stam shvarim lav becheskas shimor kaimi. Because he holds that in general, a shar is not becheskas shimor, which Rabbi means, and this is incredibly important, by the way. We're going to see this, by the way. Animals, and this is an important lesson for animal owners, right? Animals, in general, are not becheskas shimor. Animals, in general, are not considered to be behaved. They're not behaved. They're animals. That's what makes them animals, right? In other words, they're not considered to be becheska. I'm not going off on my. I'm going to save my rant for later. That's at the end of this year, right? Yeah, good, right? So I'll say they're not becheska shimur. That's very important. In other words, we assume animals are animals, and because animals are animals, they're going to do animalistic things. That's the assumption. So because that's the assumption, they're not becheskas shimur. They're not. The chazaka is not that animals are behaved. The chazaka is that animals do animalistic things. And therefore, obedinhu to mishalin kule, Sefer Rabbi said is incredible. Therefore, even the first time my ox gores, what should be the halacha? What should be the halacha? Complete damages. Because Rabbi said, when an ox gores, this is not an aberration. It's not an aberration. That's what oxen do. That's what they do, right? What animals do is animals damage. Animals act like animals. So therefore, even the first time the animal does something, the first time the animal damages, you really should have to pay complete nezek. So why don't I pay complete nezek? And the Torah simply takes it easy on a first-time offender. But I will say, but this is very interesting. See, in other words, when we see, when my ox gores Ruvain, the first time, when I say, oh my gosh, what happened over here? I can't believe such a good ox. Always been so friendly. He loves people, right? He acts so nicely all the time. They're like, I can't believe he gores. It's an ox. It's an animal. Animals are animals. They're not people. There might be a companion for some, but they're still not people. So therefore, when they go ahead and they act in a destructive fashion, the Torah says that's normal. That's normal. So really, even for a first-time offender, you should have to pay complete damages. But halacha l'maisa, the Torah takes it easy on a first-time offender, and you only have to pay chatzi nezek. But Rabbi say, but if you think about it, according to this approach, chatzi nezek is, what is it? It's mamon. It's compensatory damages. Because it's just, again, the Torah is giving you a break because you are a first-time offender. He says no. So listen to this. Rav Yeshua says no. Chatzi nezek, ultimately, again, is a knas. Why? This is so fascinating. He'll say it's a machlokes in ox behavior. So he'll say, he says, no, in general, an ox could be docile. And we assume that until an ox exhibits predatory behavior, we assume it to be a docile animal. Obedinhu delo l'shalim klal. And in reality, for a first-time offender, you shouldn't have to go ahead and pay at all. That's the reality. And the Torah gives you a penalty. So we'll say, really, for a first-time offender, you shouldn't have to pay at all, right? But because again, really, this was an aberration, and a person can't be responsible for their animals' aboratory behavior. Aberrations. Okay, good. Thank you. Right. So the nice and good. So a person can't be chayiv ultimately again for the aberrational behavior of their animal, and therefore again the first time payment is a knas. So this is just a fundamental. First of all, it's just a fascinating fundamental machlokas, like in animal behavior, which is just fascinating. But I will say this is the fundamental machlokas in chasi nezek. Is chatzi nezek knas? Is chatzi nezek mamon? It depends on how we view almost like the default state of the shar. I will say, just to understand why we're getting into this here. We're getting into this over here because this is our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is dealing with a case where a guy rolls into Beis Din and admits wrongdoing. So the shayla now is, can he be chayiv monetarily based on his own admission? And what does the Mishnah tell us? What does the Mishnah tell us? It depends. What does it depend on? Is the monetary obligation mamon or is it knas? If it's mamon, he can be chayiv based on his own admission. If it's knas, he cannot. So now the Gemara just goes, okay, chatzi nezek. Is chatzi nezek mamon or is chatzi nezek knas? That's ultimately a machlokes. So also we're not finished with this. Here we go. So Tanan, so now we're gonna delve into this about whether or not chatzi nezek is mamon or knas. So Tanan, hanizak v'amazik b'tashlumin. So listen to this. In the case of chatzi nezek, ultimately, let's say where my ox, let's say gores Ruvain's ox, or gores Ruvain, right? So what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, the nizak means the damaged party, the mazik means the damager, share in the payment. So what does this mean? So if you say that chatzi nezek is mamon, hainu d'shayich nizak b'tashlumin, then I both say it makes sense that ultimately, again, even the damaged party shares in the payment. How so? Because Lamaisa, the damaged party is only getting half damages. So in that respect, they're sharing in the payment. But I will say, according to the approach that chatzi nezek is a knas, hashtod delav didei kashakel bitashluminisa, then I will say, really, if you hold it's knas, that in reality, halacha lamaisa, the damager should not really be chayiv anything for a first-time offense. So if that's the case, really the damaged party shouldn't get anything. So lamaisa, again, they're not really sharing in the damages, or they're not sharing in the payment. So we'll say this is very interesting. Where does this come up? This comes up in carcass depreciation. Now, we'll say carcass depreciation is a big issue, right? What's the issue? Take a look at Rashi. This is actually quite fascinating. We'll say when we say that when the damaged party shares in the repayment, what does this mean? Misa achas hamada bedin sheshames hanavela kama haya yafa asher b'chayev the kama haisa hanavela yafa b'shas misa u'mishalem hachatzi avamash uzu d'minavela b'shas misa achas mechira. I'm supposed to listen to this. So here we go. My ox goes ahead and damages Ruvain. Right? So now what happens? First time offense. This is going to be chatzi nezek, right? So again, remember, how do you go ahead? Actually, let's keep it simple. I should say, my ox damages Ruvain's ox. So now what happens? Or let's say kills Ruvain's ox. Let's keep it easy. Kills Ruvain's ox. So say first time offense for my ox, therefore chatzi nezek. Now say, how do you establish chatzi nezek? So ultimately, again, kol pecha shepachsa levela. So sheshomer sanavela kama haya yafa. Hashar b'chayev, the kama haisin aveliyaf b'shas misa. So we'll say, how do you establish chatzi nezek? We look at how much was the ox worth when it was alive, right? And how much was the ox worth now that it's dead? We take that amount, u'mishali machatzi, you pay half that amount. Avama shozlu d'mei nevela b'shas misa. So we'll say, so now what happens? So watch this. So now, just one more time. My ox goes ahead and kills Ruvain's ox, first time offender. Now I'm going to pay chatzi nezek. And how do I establish chatzi nezek? What was Ruvain's ox worth when it was alive? What is Reuven's ox now worth when it's dead? Take the difference of those amounts, and I pay half of that. Okay, now Bosai, now where does the money come from? So now I go ahead and what? Now watch this. So now, mishas misa ad shas mechira, eina mazik mishalim klum ba'osa pacha. So I'll say, so now what happens? So now, the difference is that there is carcass depreciation. So I will say, so now, here's the issue. So now, Reuven's going to go and sell off his animal carcass. Right now, I will say, now the issue is there could be some depreciation between the time of the sale between the time that the Beis Din made the ruling versus the time when he's able to sell the carcass. Who suffers the loss on the carcass depreciation? That's Reuven. So in that respect, so I will say, so remember again, to begin with, Reuven, the damaged party, is only getting chatzi nezek. Plus, there may be some additional loss that he incurs in carcass depreciation because he's got to wait to sell the carcass until after Beis Din does their assessment. So Lemaisa, now again, who bears the loss of carcass depreciation? That's the damaged party, Reuven. So in that respect, even if you hold that, so let's go back to the Gemara. So Alaman Damar Palga Niska Kinas Ashtalav Didei Kashaga B'Tishlumin Tush Gemara's Lo Nitzcha Ela Pachas Nevela. See, even if you hold that Chatzi Nezek is Knas, that really Reuven shouldn't be entitled to anything. The fact that he gets something is incredible. That's just a bonus to him. He still shares in the loss, and that he has to deal with carcass depreciation. Pachas Nevela Tanina. We already learned about carcass depreciation. Tashlume Nezek Belami Shabayla Metaplim Benevela. Tashlumi Nezek teaches us that halacha l'maisa, the owners, which means the victim, right? The victim, in this case, Reuven, right? Reuven has to deal with the carcass of his now dead shar, right? Carcass of his shar, and any depreciation that occurs, he has to bear that loss. So the Gemara says, we already learned it. We'll say two different cases. One is talking about a tam, one is talking about a muad. One is talking about a first-time offender, and one is talking about a habitual offender. I need both. Why? In a case of a tam, since this is a first-time offender, I would have thought that's why the victim, has to deal with carcass depreciation. Aval muad di'ad emalo. But maybe in the case of muad, where my animal is a habitual offender, maybe Reuven doesn't have to bear the loss of carcass depreciation. Or in the case of muad, I would have said, since I'm paying nezek shalim, maybe that's the case where where Reuven has to bear the carcass depreciation. Aval tam imalob, maybe not tam. Therefore, tzricha. Therefore, both say need halach in both cases, both in tam and both in muad. Halacha l'maisa, whether I'm paying chatzi nezek or nezek shalim. Just interestingly enough, who bears the loss of carcass depreciation? That is always going to be on Reuven. Quite fascinating. So Tashma, so I just want to point out, we're still in the midst of this machlokes. Is chatzi nezek mamon or is chatzi nezek knas? That is still a machlokes. So let's analyze. Tashma, ma bein tam lemuad. What's there between tam and muad? Shatam mishalim chatzi nezek migufo, umuad mishalim chatzi nezek shalim minalia. Well, so listen to this. Tam pays chatzi nezek from the worth of the damaging animal. And I will say, this is another machlokes. The other machlokes is, how do you establish half damages? See, Rashi just seemed to say before that half damages was based on what? The animal that was killed. This particular brisa indicates to us here that chatzi nezek is actually based on half of the value of the damaging animal. So my shar, my ox, which gored Reuven's ox, chatzi nezek is half the value of my ox. I pay Reuven half the value of my ox. Versus nezek shalim, complete damages, halacha l'maisa is ultimately min ha'aliyah, is assessed from the best of the property of the damager. So says the Gemara, velo katani, so that's the distinction. Velo katani shatamay mishalim al pi atzmo, umur mishalim al pi atzmo. I will say, now if chatzi nezek was really a knas, you could have made another distinction. What's the other distinction? Chatzi nezek cannot be paid based on your own admission. Nezek shalim, which is mamon, can. Tana b'shir. No, that's not a good example. The brisa doesn't mean to include a complete and exhaustive list. It left off certain things. My shir, why did it leave the high shir? Shir chatzi kofer. But say left off the case of chatzi kofer. Now what's chatzi kofer? Take a look at Rashi. Last Rashi on the daf. shir chatzi kofer, lo shna kal chilukim shebeneim, shari af yesh chiluk ze beneim, shamuad shehemis es ha'adam shalim kofer, shalim, the tam shehemis afilu chatzi kofer, kedino ben izaki lo mashal. Listen to this. If my ox kills a person, chas v'shalom, even if my ox, ultimately again, if my muad ox killed a person, I pay what's called kofer shalim. Kofer is the payment you pay for for the ox killing a person. However, if halacha l'maisa, my ox was a tam, never did anything to anyone, there's no concept of chatzi kofer. There's no concept of chatzi kofer. Therefore, again, if my ox were to kill a person, the first time it does it, I'm pater. So the Gemara says, Im yushum chatzi. So that's another distinction, and that's left off the list. Im yushum chatzi kofer lav shura. Chatzi kofer is not a good thing missing from the list. Why? Amud beis. So the Gemara says, how many whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Yossi Aglili he da'amar tam mishan chatzi kofer. Because Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds that the tam ultimately does pay chatzi kofer. All right, tashma. So we'll say, I just want to point out, all of this is just to follow the progression. Our Mishnah introduced us into the world, to the distinction between knas and mamon. That knas, you cannot pay based of your own admission. Mamon, you can. We're just doing a deep dive now into chatzi nezek, half damages that you pay when your ox is a first-time offender. And we're just trying to figure out, is chatzi nezek mamon? Is it a compensatory damage? Or is it knas? Is it a penalty payment? Why do we care about that? I care because if I roll into Beis Din, and I say, my ox gored Ruvain's ox. Ruvain's not suing me. Ruvain has no idea. I'm coming and admitting. Can I be chayiv to chatzi nezek based on my own admission? Tashma. Second line from the top, mem aleph mem beis. Tashma, hey mishori es ploni, o shoro shel ploni. My ox went ahead and killed Ploni, or killed the ox of Ploni. Harei zeh mishalim al piatzmo. I could pay based on my own admission. My lav betam. Are we not dealing with a tam? And therefore, what I'm really admitting to is what? Is chatzi nezek. And what do you see from here? That you could be chayiv chatzi nezek based on your own admission, which tells me what? That chatzi nezek is mamon. The Gemara says, lo, b'muad. No, it's about muad. Aval b'tam mai. But if I were to admit that my tam animal went ahead and killed someone, or I should say injured another ox, what would be the halacha? Eno shalom piatzmo. Ultimately, then you would not pay based on your own admission. What do you see from here? That chatzi nezek is knas. If that's the case, adetani seifa avdo shel ploni eno mashal piat. So if that's the case, then at the end of the brisa, which says that if I come and I admit that my ox killed the eved of Ruvain, that I don't pay at all because that's knas. Niflog v'nis nebedidei. Don't introduce that case. Rather, just go ahead and splice the first case and do a subdivision of the first case. When is this so? That ultimately, again, if I come to Beis Din and admit that my ox gored Ruvain's ox and I'm going to be chayiv, that's by a muad. Aval betam eno mashalim al piatzmo. But ultimately, again, by a tam, I would not go ahead and pay based on my own admission. And from that, you would be able to learn that chatzi nezek is indeed knas. To which the Gemara says, no, kula b'muad kamari. It's just not the brisa. The entire brisa is talking about a case of muad. It's not talking about a case of tam. Okay, so tashma zakla kol mishalim yesra mashem azek eno mishalim biatzmo. So let's listen to this. What did the brisa say before? And we actually had this in Mishnah. What's the klal say? Any time that you pay more than you're obligated to pay, that shows that what's the nature of your payment? It's a knas. And if it's a knas, then what? Then halacha l'maisa, you do not pay based on your own admission. Now, what could I infer from this? Ha-pachos mi-mashe hizik. I could infer from this, but if you pay less than what you're liable to pay, then what? You can pay based on your own admission. Now both say, what's an example of paying less than what you're obligated to pay? Chatzi nezek. And it sounds like over here that you can pay chatzi nezek based on your own admission, which tells me that chatzi nezek is what? Mamon. To which the Gemara says, Lo tema pachos mashe hizik. So no. Don't say less than you damaged. Ela ima. No, rather you could make a different inference. When can you pay ultimately again based on your own admission? That's when you're paying what you're liable to pay. But if you have to pay more than what you're liable to or less than what you're liable to, that's called the kinas. And the kinas ultimately again is not paid based on your own admission. If that's the case, listni zaklau. If that's the case, then just make a more general statement or more inclusive statement. anytime you're not paying what you damaged, right? So in other words, if I'm paying compensatory damages, that means I'm paying what I damaged. Anytime I pay and my payment does not reflect what I damaged, either because I'm paying more or what? I'm paying less. That's the case where I would not make that payment based on my own admission, because that payment is a knas. So the Gemara says, umashma yeser, and therefore mashma pachos mashma yeser. So why don't you say it like that? To which the Gemara says, tiyufta. That's a good refutation. The hilchasa, but the halacha is palga niska kinasa. We'll say the halacha is chatzi nezek is a knas. The Gemara says that makes no sense. Tiyufta, you just said that we refuted the point that chatzi nezek is a knas, and then you said the hilchasa, and then you said the halacha is that chatzi nezek is a knas. The Gemara says in taima ma'isosiv mishum delo katani kamasha hizik. Lo psikale, kevan di'ika chatzi nezek tzroros. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. The Mishnah cannot make a statement that anytime you don't pay exactly what you're chayiv to, ultimately, again, that's going to be called knas and not mammon. I'll tell you why. I will say, there is an interesting case. All right, there's an interesting case called chatzi nezek tzroros. I will say, what's chatzi nezek tzroros? Here we go. If an animal goes ahead and is walking and kicks up pebbles, and as a result, ultimately, again, of kicking up pebbles, let's say my animal's walking, my shar or my chicken is walking, kicks up pebbles, the pebbles break the kli of Ruvain. Pebbles break the kli of Ruvain. So we'll say that is called tzroros. That is called tzroros. So we'll say tzroros is actually really quite interesting. Tzroros ultimately, again, are considered to be, if you take a look at Rashi, it's considered to be a tolda of regel. Let's say regel are damages that an animal does in its normal course of walking. So we'll say there's a halacha l'Moshe Misina that says that for a first-time offender through regel, through a normal act of animal behavior, ultimately, again, you only pay chatzi nezek. But that chatzi nezek is considered to be mammon, is not considered to be knas. So there is a case of where you go ahead and you pay less than what you're liable to pay, but it's still a case of mammon and not knas. If you take a look at Rashi, all right, I won't try to finish. Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Kevan di kachatzi nezek, take a look. The mishtalim beniske behema b'ma'aleches v'etiza tzroros metachas ragla. But so listen to this. An animal is walking, and in its course of walking, ultimately it kicks up stones. And what happens? V'zika. And now the stones, the pebbles, break something. Disnan b'babakama de mishalemes chatzi nezek. Abahu chatzi nezek kamla babakama. Tilchasa gemirula misinai shutolda deregel upitura b'shus arabim. I will say generally, any damages that an animal does through regel, I will say regel is just damage that an animal does in its normal course of walking. In general, the owner is pater for those type of damages when they are performed in the public domain. Ki regel v'niski regel lav k'nasaninu elamamona sharimu edes mitchilasa v'gabe tzoros tu da'akil rachmana. So I will say, so again, so interestingly enough, what ends up happening over here is really something fascinating. So I will say there is a case. So technically speaking, regel you're pater for, and therefore again halacha l'maisa. There is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai that says that for a first-time regel offense of tzroros, of kicking up pebbles, you are chayiv chatzi nezek. This is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. But I will say this chatzi nezek is not knas. This chatzi nezek is mammon. So therefore, I will say what the Gemara is saying over here is halacha l'maisa. The Brisa cannot have made a statement that says, anytime you pay less or more than what you're liable to pay, that's automatically knas. You can't make a statement like that. Why? Because it's not true. Because there is one case where you're going to pay less, but it's still mammon. What's that one case? Chatzi nezek of tzros. Therefore, the Gemara says, the hilchas hagemirila dimamonahu mishum hachi lo katani. So the Gemara says, all right, we'll have to stop over here. We'll finish up the parak Emirat Hashem tomorrow, and we'll see again the halacha l'maisa when it comes to the din, ultimately again when it comes to the din of chatzi nezek of knas as well. We'll say shkoyach.